Thank you for coming. Welcome to this second series of workshops that Platypus has organised, different perspectives on the left, where we've just invited a series of different representatives from different groups to come and present their project to Platypus. With the idea of utopia and program and utopia in mind as the theme of the conference, we've asked the representatives to respond to that question a little bit in their remarks, but really it's just a chance for them to present their project. So I'd very much like to thank John Beacham of the Party of Socialism and Liberation for coming today. He is on the Central Committee of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and he's the Chicago director of the Answer Coalition and the Midwest organizer for the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Basically, I'm going to give John about 30 minutes or less if you want to present the project of the PSL, and then I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you. If it's cool, I'm just going to start out with a little survey. Nothing major. If you don't want to raise your hand, you don't have to, but I'm just wondering, just to figure out how to frame my remarks, how many people have heard of the Party for Socialism and Liberation? How many people have either read our program or feel like they're somewhat knowledgeable of who we are and what we stand for? Okay, so there's a couple. All right. So I think what I'll do is I'll just, hopefully in a lot less than 30 minutes, just say who we are and what we stand for. I'll talk briefly about what we think the program is and maybe say a few things about utopia. For us, we have a program. There's a print copy on the table here. It's also available on our website at pslweb.org. The program is a product of a term of internal party discussion, and then the product of discussion, debate, amendments, and ratification at a Congress that had a Congress. We've had two Congresses now. Our first Congress is where one of the principal things we were doing was getting our program out there, and that Congress was there were elected delegates to that Congress and branches around the country. We have branches in a lot of the major cities, elected delegates to go to the Congress. So it was a process of internal democracy. But really, the program is for us. It's not for us. We have maybe what could be considered an old school approach to program. I don't know if maybe old school isn't the way to talk about it, I'm not sure. But that the program is really a guide for the working class and the people of a particular country, and because we're communists internationally as well to a certain respect, to political action, political vision, and for the political transformation of capitalism into communism. It's a document meant to help and facilitate, not necessarily the lecture, but help and facilitate the overthrow of the capitalist system. It would make sense actually to really not, in some ways, not even have a program right now, because the program doesn't really fulfill its purpose unless it becomes something where the masses themselves are reading it, are interested in reading it, and looking for, during a crisis of capitalism, are looking for basic ideas on how to combat the system and overthrow it. So, having said that, we have a program because it's our analysis, it's our perception, and we're a party of activists. We're out in the streets, we're in lots of different movements, that the conditions in the United States even and around the world are such that the rebirth of the communist movement is highly possible. In fact, it's only during times of economic crisis and worsening conditions for workers and poor people that socialism becomes possible at all. And socialism really, for us, it's a living thing, so it doesn't really become something until it is possible for it to be something generally taken up and struggled for. So that's why we have a program. We have a program because we believe, and I think it'd be wrong for us to prognosticate, we don't believe in prognostication, but that there is the possibility that there will be a rebirth of the communist movement in the world. And that's based on decades of imperialist aggression and worsening conditions for people around the world. That there is no other recourse. If people are pressed and have their backs up against the wall, there's no other effective antidote. There are other antidotes that we're not at war with or anything like that, but we believe that there's no other effective antidote than communism, and that would be the expropriation of the means of the capitalist means of production, making them public property and collectively owned, and rationally planning an economy for people's needs. And so our program is very specific too. I mean, I'm not going to go through it, you should check it out, but we have one. It was a course of debate, and we suggest things. We suggest things based on the international situation and the domestic situation. But our starting point for all things that we consider and all actions that we take and all programmatic precepts that we put forward, for lack of a better way of saying, is the international situation itself. Is the international relationship of forces, the conditions for working and oppressed people around the world. Like for us, there's no separating domestic and foreign policy or responses to imperialist policy, both domestically and foreignly. If you try to do that, it does great. Well, violence isn't right. It does damage to the struggle if you try to separate those things. So, I mean, I could go into more specific things. I think maybe I'll just give a couple of examples of what we actually do. I mean, based on our lineage in the movement, and I'm talking this way because I assume that there's many people here that, there's some people that may be new to leftist politics. There may be some people who have been around a while, but our basic political approach comes out of a tendency within the United States where we see that, our analysis is that there are really two main camps in the world. When the Soviet Union still existed, and they're the Eastern European countries, our approach to the world was an independent approach, like not adherence to any like socialist or communist network, but that there was two main camps: the socialist countries, the oppressed countries, and the workers and oppressed of the world, and on the other hand, the imperialists. So that is still, to this day, our basic, it's oversimplified, yes, it's our basic approach. Every situation is different. And that's why, for example, in the case of Libya, recent cases of Libya or Syria, we are, very heavily involved in opposing intervention in both those countries. And, like in the case of Libya, take a very particular approach. We took the approach of course, being against war and U.S. and foreign intervention in Libya, and defending Libya from imperialist intervention. But at the same time, being very firm about not participating in the racist demonization campaigns against Libyan leaders, including Muammar Gaddafi. That doesn't mean, and you won't find one scrap of language in any of our literature saying that we supported Gaddafi, but that we took an approach that the imperialists were doing fine, and we always think it's supposed to be the imperialists are doing fine in their demonization campaign, which is the basic way in which they try to get people here in the United States and other imperialist countries to go along with the bombing, and that there was every need to resist that demonization campaign. And we feel that actually gives us the ability to talk in practical terms about what the Libyan state actually is, or was, under Gaddafi and under the leadership at the time. Any other approach runs the possibility of having to actually mischaracterize what's going on the ground in Libya. Like the fact that 1 million people poured out into Tripoli a number of times against the NATO intervention and against the NATO bombing, and some of those people were supporters of Gaddafi's, but some weren't, is something that we could, freely report as, look, these are people that are willing to resist NATO, and there's working people, there's poor people, there's women that are on the side of defending their government against imperialism. So when we take that approach, we can talk about that. We don't have to run away from that. And what this means is often, for example, we've gotten called Saddam Hussein supporters, we're called Assad supporters, we were called Milosevic supporters, we were called Gaddafi supporters, so on and so forth, which is not true. And which, having taken this position, that's going to be the weapon that's used to try to silence the position that we took, which was very simple. Anti-war, anti-intervention, no to the racist demonization campaign that's meant to be the hammer to destroy an entire country and reduce city to rubble and kill thousands of people. So I'm giving this example of Libya maybe because I'm just trying to say, if the question is what is the PSL compared to other groups, I'm giving this example. And does this mean that we worked with, and we were, we pretty much were, the most active mass organizers of protests against the Libyan war in the United States. And there were a decent number, there wasn't a huge demonstrations, but there were decent demonstrations, mostly African-American people in the United States. And it meant that we worked with our principal allies were Cynthia McKinney and the Nation of Islam, which, if you know the Nation of Islam, you know that they are Gaddafi supporters. It did mean that that was our coalition in order to defend, to actively oppose the war. And if you think about it, in the United States, being able to bring African American and anti-war forces together, and many African Americans and most African Americans saw through exactly what the U.S. was trying to do in Libya, and most African Americans are against the United States and Britain and France recolonizing Africa. To bring those two forces together, there was no other path. We felt like there was no other path but that basic understanding of the situation, that political program, and joining with those allies. And for us, that's exactly what's needed. If you think back in the movement, if you think back, and we want to work with all those who want to oppose the war. It's not a sectarian principle. Everybody who came to the demonstration against the war in Libya, we wanted them to come and participate. But if you think back to the Iraq War, there was a mass outpouring in the United States. It was mostly anti-Republican and anti-Bush, but there were millions of people in the streets, and we were like one of the main organizers of those mass anti-war protests. In those protests, every single group on the left came out on the street. Not every single group, I shouldn't say that. But the vast majority of groups came out on the street and helped organize those protests. For us, what we're saying is that even if there's not massive or opposition, or there's not large-scale opposition, or even semi-large-scale opposition in the United States, that opposition is still necessary. And for communist formation, what we need to be able to do is resist all of the pressure within the United States, the pressure to stay on the sidelines when the U.S. was bombing whole Libyan cities into the ground, and be silent to some extent. That there has to be a way to be able to do that. Because, look, no one in the United States is, right now, for the most part, I mean, it does happen, but the chances of going to prison for being an anti-war organizer are not that high. If the stakes are higher in an imperialist war or an inter-imperialist war, the chances that anti-war organizers will be faced with prison sentences and other forms of repression are very high. And during those times, the same types of pressures that are happening during the Libyan war and now are happening in Syria are going to be greatly amplified. And if there isn't a formation in the United States, if there aren't groups in the United States that can stand up to that pressure and navigate a way to still counter all of imperialism strategies in order to strengthen their grip on the world and on the Middle East, then we have no way of expanding the resistance against imperialism and expanding the resistance against the capitalist system. Now, how much time did I take?
I mean, you've taken about 15 minutes.
Okay. So, I bring up Syria and Libya just for a very specific reason. Because in a way, those are litmus tests of leftists and socialists right now in the United States. Like what, the main program internationally of the United States is to reinstitute a new Middle East that's firmly under their grasp. And the reason for that is that it's a center of world trade. It's an area of great natural resources, oil and natural gas, in the Middle East and Central Asia. And if the United States, if Wall Street doesn't control and dominate that area, which is right in the middle of Afro-Eurasia, where 85% of the world's population lives, then Wall Street has no way to dominate the world. Like, it's not a choice. Central command of the US military is in the Middle East for a very specific reason. Because if they don't dominate that region, they can't be the most powerful country in the world. And dominating that region allows them, in their minds, allows them to keep their position in the world. And every single thing Wall Street does is not just based on the domestic market, it's based on the entire global market and keeping US hegemony in the world and in the global market. And if they can dominate that region of the world, they can also, any opposition to them, any military or political opposition to them, they can more easily deter and wipe out that opposition because they can just turn off the energy resources it takes to put tanks and put planes and put ships in the battlefield. So for us, it's not like separate from the struggle how best from within the United States, where the most powerful capitalist class exists, how to resist domination of the Middle East. And so that's why I put that forward. But at the same time, there's great possibility here in the US, we believe, for reviving the communist and socialist struggle, and just reviving struggle in general. We believe that in a lot of ways we are starting from scratch. And I think this is an objective assessment in a way. The capitalist crisis that just started in 2007, 2008, it's a severe crisis. And in many places outside the United States, it's a protracted, deep, and painful crisis. Like, for example, in Greece. There has been no large-scale, mass international movement to counter that, which is what is greatly needed. However, the Occupy movement, the uprising in Madison, and even the Chicago teacher strike are signs that there is the possibility for struggle to break out and to become something that sweeps the landscape and sweeps people up into it. And we have seen over the last decade or so a definite growth in the amount that young people are interested in leftist ideas or interested in socialism and communism. I mean, our party, our tendency has grown more in the last 10 years than it did in the last 20 years before that. And our party has significantly also grown. It's been mostly young people, people from the Latino community, young people from the African American community. So there is that. Our approach is we're trying to build a party that's based in struggle, both domestic and foreign, while at the same time rebuilding the communist movement in the United States. And we believe that, and I'm not going to elaborate much on this, but we believe that building a party, building an organization is a very integral part of rebuilding the communist movement. Our adversaries are well organized and centralized, and we don't believe that it has to come in any old form, and the arguments between Trotskyists and Maoists and Stalinists and the old socialist groups to us are important. People should know them, but we're in a new period. We don't think things should be reliant upon that. We need to find new ways of resparking the conversation, of building the type of communist movement when an economic crisis does happen that can effectively, lack of a better way of saying it, help harness new movements, help new movements. I wouldn't say harness, help new movements in the direction of building powerful mass movements and powerful organizations that can take on the capitalist establishment, that can beat back austerity and imperialist war. But I mean, we want to win. We want to defeat the capitalist system, expropriate the means of production, and set society on a new path. At this point in history, it's totally possible. We can produce a lot more than we're producing. We can take care of people's needs. The break on that is the fact that the means of production are all centralized under capitalist ownership. That needs to be smashed, for lack of a better, I mean, I'm not trying to say that in a stereotypical way, but that needs to be done away with, and a new type of society needs to be instituted. But we believe that new society can't be instituted unless there is a well-trained and experienced fighting force. I mean, how else could that happen? I mean, how else? I mean, our foes are serious. They're well organized, and they have a lot. They have a lot of power. So I think I'll stop there with just saying one more thing. I mean, all this means that we're involved in all the different struggles that we can be. Of course, just like any organization, we think deeply about what we should be doing at any time, and we, have discussions about it. But we're in the leaders of the anti-war movement. We're in the immigrant rights movement. We're in the LGBT movement. We're in the women's movement. We're affiliated with a women's organization. We spend a lot of time in solidarity with Venezuela and Cuba. The council, the Venezuelan consulate, comes to our office every now and then. Like, we just held a meeting after Chavez's death. What's next for Venezuela? People from our party just went down to Venezuela in an international delegation to see how we can help. There's lots of different things. Besides publishing newspapers, we have a regular newspaper. We have books. We have a radio station. It's called Liberation Radio. I mean, it is actually carried on some radio stations. But it just started. It's like on a pod. You guys have to help me out. I think it's like podcasted, so you can listen to it on the internet. It's weekly. It's called Liberation Radio. We produce it ourselves, and we're very serious about not just struggling, but we are embarking on a serious project of having a sort of like a holistic, I don't know if that's the right word, like communist school. Like, we're working to put lots of different educational programs and videos like on the internet where people can actually go through a whole series of classes, for lack of a better word. Because that's what, like I said, we want to win, but the consciousness that we need to overthrow the system and form organizations and movements to do that, it's not something that necessarily workers and oppressed, are born, you're not necessarily born, like I wasn't born into it, like my dad's a Tea Party, right? So, I mean, but some people are born into it, like I have a son, maybe I guess he's born into it. He can do whatever he wants, by the way. I'm not going to force him to be in the party. He's too young to be in the PSL. But I'm done.
Thank you. Thanks very much, John. That was great. I suppose I'll open it up for questions now, but I might take the opportunity to ask the first question. I was very interested in your articulation of the question of imperialism. I know you don't feel able to be on the panel tomorrow, but if you're able to attend in the audience, your contributions would be very welcome there. And I was wondering, I suppose connected to that was a question that I think we asked panelists to respond to, which you have a bit, which is what is one of the main challenges facing the building of a working class revolutionary movement towards socialism in the US today. And I wondered whether the international problem of imperialism was for you, for the PSL, the central problem to building that movement in the US.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest problem is the capitalist system. I mean, I think that's the biggest problem in building the left and building the communist movement. For us, the reason why we are very clear about starting with the international situation is just because of where we live. You know, one of the main devices they have against us is just racism and chauvinism, just saying, you know, the thing where the U.S. should and has the right to intervene in other countries, including economic sanctions, which kill people, bombing campaigns, full-scale invasions, and just straight-up racist depictions of other countries' people and leaders. That's a very serious impediment to regular, even poor working people in the U.S., even oppressed people in the U.S. That's a very, you know, significant, who have, you know, the basis which to understand this situation better than, you know, someone that lives in a middle-class neighborhood, perhaps. But that's a very, very, you know, serious impediment for people's consciousness. The idea that somehow American has some form of exceptionalism to it. And it comes in all stripes, right? But that is something that they really try to just drill into us. You know, that America can't, you know, we believe that literally it would be almost inconceivable for the United States to do anything progressive in the world at all. Are we totally ruling it out? I mean, that would be unscientific. But the U.S. as an economic structure is completely predicated on dominating the rest of the world, and, you know, preserving and expanding U.S. hegemony. So based on that, you know, I mean, are we gonna like tell people they shouldn't take U.S. food aid if it, you know, it comes to them? I mean, no. But that food aid, that doesn't make that food aid coming from it's not coming from a progressive vantage point. I mean, people are hungry, should get food anyway, right? So that's for us. We don't think that, like, there's no genetic difference between people in the United States and the rest of the world. I mean, there's no reason why people in the U.S. can't struggle against the system or can't figure it out or don't have the will or determination, especially the most poor and oppressed in the United States, can't find the will or determination to take on their oppressors. I mean, you know, this country used to be a slave country. Slavery was defeated by slaves and freed blacks joining the Union cause, risking 2,000 of them risked their lives in the Union Army, even though it meant that they were going to be ill-treated by the Union Army, and then if they were captured by the Southern Army, that they would be executed on the spot. In other words, 200,000 people knew they were going to be cannon fodder and had to win, or they were going to die, on the spot. Nonetheless, they did that. That happened in this country. Apartheid in the South was defeated. The rule of the Klan was defeated in the South through the organizing of African American people. And we're talking about, besides the Native people, the poorest and most oppressed people in the country. And that happened here, and other movements have happened here. We don't think there's any impediment. Like, there's workers and oppressed people, like, aren't the students. In middle class people, you know, people aren't the impediment. You know, capitalism is, and imperialism and racism play a very specific function in the United States. So that's why we, you know.
Okay, so I don't know your name, sorry.
We know each other. So, our country has been tolerable of having communism and socialism in not only politics, but just accepting that concept that there's communism, socialism, and put in our society. You alluded this a little bit in your statement, your opening statement. I mean, is there this revival of communism, socialism in our country? If so, is it a brand new school of thought, just like the Frankfurt School kind of changed what, you know, Marxism is and everything? Is there a whole new outlook of what communism, socialism means? Is there a redefinition of that? If so, why not keep some of the old ideals of what communism, socialism used to be?
Do you want me to answer?
Yeah. But
okay. All right. I mean, I don't think there's a rebirth of the. I mean, I don't think what's happening in the United States, you could really say there's like, but there is a rebirth of activism. There's a rebirth of, I mean, you know, political organizations are growing in the United States. I mean, that's happening. I mean, what I would mean about the rebirth of the communist movement, it's like, only really one time in the U.S. has there been a communist organization where a large percentage of or a decent percentage of workers and poor people look to them, right, for help, for organization, for guidance. I mean, that was the Communist Party during the 20s and 30s. I mean, they were able to organize people, and they were organizing people on, a fairly like internationalist, revolutionary outlook. I mean, the question about old and new is always, it's always very important. I mean, for us, we think that the communist movement needs to be reborn, re-energized, for lack of a better word. And I mean, you should read our program. I mean, it's not, it's fairly like, for lack of a better word, it's fairly programmatic. It's like, this is capitalism, and this is what would be possible under socialism. I mean, we're not trying to dictate to people what should happen under socialism. But for us, communism is the simple thing, is that the means of production need to be expropriated, and there has to be a struggle in order to do that, and then society needs to be reorganized on the basis of producing for people's needs. And then, after if a communist revolution were to happen, then there would be probably an extended period of still struggling. Old ideas, old ways, the capitalist class, a lot of them would still be around, and so there would still be a need for social organization in order to secure the gains that had been won through any revolution that would happen in the United States. I mean, it's really not any more complicated than that. It's like, we make a lot of food, people should be able to eat, people should be able to go to education for free. If someone's sick, they should be able to get medical treatment. And the only way we can guarantee that is if production is in the hands of the people. I think that's still a relevant.
One at the front.
Okay, so you briefly mentioned the lineage of your party, and I'd be very interested in hearing you talk more about that. My understanding is that the PSL came out of the Workers' World Party, which came out of the SWP, and correct me if I've been misinformed. And I'd be interested in hearing you talk about how you see those splits and the politics behind them as significant today, or if you don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Like, and I didn't give the name, but it's the name for our general international outlook is the Global Class Camp Strategy, for lack of a better. And a guy named Sam Marcy was instrumental in developing that, and he did it while he was in the Socialist Workers' Party. And some of the branches of the Socialist Workers' Party left and formed the Workers' World Party. I was in the Workers' World Party. Some of us left 7 years ago now. I think I have it right. 7 years ago now. And we didn't talk about it much at the time. Really small organizations. Let's be honest. I mean, most of the socialist and communist and other leftist organizations are fairly small, especially based on the task. And we felt because there was a lack of internal democracy at the time, that we couldn't work out our differences, that there was new possibilities that hadn't been around for decades as far as like building a party, and aiding the struggle, that we needed to work out these differences at the time. We were unable to work them out, so we just decided to amicably split and form a new party. I mean, since then we've grown exponentially. We have chapters in 5 times as many places as we did when we started. And our emphasis was not towards the party split, but towards the masses. We felt like we were involved in mass organizations, and we wanted to be a little more organized in the way that we built our party and built the movement. I mean, the specific differences we had politically with them, I mean, to most working people, if you went to Workers' World Party's website or our website, or maybe even Fightback's website, you would see that, you may not, I mean, who would really be able to tell the difference? You'd have to know, like, what we decided to do. And I'll give you a good example, because the elections are always a good example of where parties stand. We run our own, in 2008, 2012, we ran our own candidates for president, didn't attack Obama, straight as a person, right? Because you know, our approach is always one that's in the moment and practical, right? It's not like we didn't oppose his policy or oppose the Democratic Party, but black people in the U.S. would have also taken our attacks as attacks on them. You can't, there's no way to say that's not, you know, in our assessment that that's not true. And we go out campaigning. We talk to people, you know what I mean? And we talk to people in all the neighborhoods. That's the basic assessment of African American people in the U.S., is that all of the attacks against Obama are racist and directed at him. But nevertheless, the Democratic Party and President Obama, it's a capitalist party. Republicans are a capitalist party. So we run our own candidates in a way where we positively affirm our program and a socialist program, a revolutionary program to overthrow the capitalist system. Workers' World Party in 2008 supported Cynthia McKinney, which we supported too. But then after the election was over, self-criticized and says they should have supported Obama. Freedom Road Socialist Organization was kind of like us too. They put out a big thing in the elections and say, defeat the right, which means defeat the Republicans. They don't support the Democratic candidate, but they tell all their members to go around helping to get the Democratic Party elected. So for us, the main difference with us and Workers' World was over that type of approach to the struggle in oppressed communities. Like, you know, our approach is the same. We believe the struggle against capitalism in the U.S. has to be a struggle against racism. Like, there's no way of separating it. But when you get down to it, there were three different approaches. Those were practical things, and to me, that's the best way to explain what our differences are, and the reason why we, besides the fact that we very much believe that there has to be internal democratic discussion as much as possible, as much as a revolutionary organization can have. Like, we have elections. Like, I'm on the Central Committee. I was elected.
Gabe first.
Yeah. So, to pick up on the electoral, on your orientation toward electoral politics, in what way are the differences between PSL and these other groups, which might have slightly different lines, or some critique Obama, some don't, some whatever? In what way is that relevant?
Sorry, can people at the back here? Could you like sort of speak up a bit?
In what way are these differences in orientations toward electoral politics relevant to your program to, make revolution?
Yeah.
Or because like you could just say like, okay, you all have there's different perspectives on, whether or not we should critique Obama or how we should critique Obama.
Right.
But it doesn't seem like. So where's the program for revolution?
Right.
And where's the difference in program for revolution among these parties?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the elections are a sham. I mean, they're completely, and for the capitalists, they're a device to actually sideline struggle, sideline alternatives to their system. I mean, that's consciously the way they use it. Our approach to the elections is, why not, it boils down to this, is why not run into the elections if the capitalists have the playing field and they're going to be able to like dominate the political discourse, which is what happens in the United States. Why not enter into the elections and bring up a program that says we should overthrow the entire system and just talk to people about it? Like literally running in the elections allows us to actually talk to people about that. We talk to more people about that and recruit more members into our party during the election cycle than any other time. And the simple reason is because ballot access allows people to find out who we are. You know? And honestly, like, they don't care about elections. You know, I mean, the capitalists don't care about elections. If the elections don't work out in their favor, they just use other means. 30% of the population still can't even participate in the elections in the United States. I mean, they're a complete sham. And, you know, we don't have any faith that winning an election means anything in the United States. And we don't even run into, if we won, we would take the seat, to do the same exact thing that we do outside of that seat, is to fight the system. Okay? If we actually were able to take the seat, let's say a PSL member won mayor of Chicago, for example. It's probably not going to happen in the United States, ever. Maybe it'll happen like, a socialist will be elected like 2 weeks before a revolution or something. It's hyperbole. But why wouldn't we take that office and use it to fight the system?
Okay. Pam?
I had I guess a couple of questions. You seem to be sort of going back between two ways of thinking about this problem, I guess, and maybe you could clarify. One is what you've just articulated, like as long as we can talk to people about this or raise consciousness about this, like approaching it this way.
Right.
But then you talked about your other work. You said that you as an organization were leaders in the anti-bombing of Libya. You talked about the anti-war movement, and you called yourself a group of activists, and we're emphasizing that. You said that the Syria and the Libya situation posed a litmus test for the left, and but then you said that what the goal of your party was to create an independent stance. Okay, and then you went back and I think you said something quite kind of revealing about the black people's perspective on Obama, and said that you understood that you didn't want to alienate yourselves from your constituency, and that their understanding of Obama and the critiques of Obama was that any critique of Obama is racist. Okay, so I think like in my own mind, as you're saying this,
I said
attack on Obama is racist.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was thinking about how you create an independent stance within, let's say, the context of like Libya or Syria. If you've articulated as like, well, we need to be on the side of weakening the imperialist powers, right? And so that's the side that you want to take. But what does this actually mean? Like, what does this actually look like? So, you know, because you mentioned about like political and military opposition to the United States, like would be like a kind of goal, something for the way in which you're dealing with this. But so what would it have to look like to be politically effective? Why, like how, it seems to me that there's something else going on than simply having conversations with people, that you seem to say that there are these movements out there and the job of your organization is to support these movements. But again, how does that action support an independent stance? What's the relationship between like the issue of raising consciousness among people towards the direction of like a socialist transformation of society, and your activity as part of the anti-war movement, Libya campaigns, and this idea of supporting movements that are already there?
I mean, for me, it's just we organized a national ongoing campaign to stop the bombing of Libya. We had emergency demonstrations. Cynthia McKinney went to Libya a number of times. We had a national tour with her. We had a demonstration at the White House. We had a demonstration in Harlem. Stop the bombing of Libya. At the same time, we had in-depth political analysis, news analysis. I wrote a couple articles that were read by thousands of people that went deeper into the situation. But we did that as people who were actively opposing the bombing, right? So now the demonstrations were at the most. There's a couple thousand people in Harlem and there's about 500 in DC. When we had an emergency protest here in Chicago, there was like 80 people, right? And then, you know, I mean, let's be like, you know, we shouldn't exaggerate stuff. We had articles on our website that were probably read by a couple thousand people. Maybe they got a little larger play. I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, those two things aren't mutually exclusive to me. Those
Yeah, I was asking about the relationship between them, which I'm not quite, like, so the articles that you were putting forth in your website, etc., are these then, like, the material that creates an independent stance that you see as absent? Like, because you clearly have said, like, there's this absence, like, we need to start over, and, you know, so we have to, but then you say also we have to support movements that are out there, where we play a position of leadership. Okay, so let me just ask it this way. What does leadership mean in this situation? What does it mean to be a leader of the anti-war movement, of this Libya campaign? What kind of leadership are you providing for those movements?
I mean, we feel like it's just having a clear idea of what should be done and having the organizational capability to do it in a non-sectarian way, where we help organize all the people, all the forces that can be organized. I mean, that's our approach. I mean, it's, you know, I try to give a specific example in the case of Libya. You know, I'm not sure how else to I'm not sure how else to characterize it. I mean, when I say independent, I'm not sure what you're referring to what I said. I mean, our tendency was to be independent of the, say, of the Communist International and of the Fourth International, and even of, I mean, of China, right? It's like, you know, there are other organizations that were affiliated, networks that are affiliated with those different countries, for lack of a better way to put it. All I meant to say is that our hallmark has been independent and supportive, militantly supportive, but independent, you know, ideologically. You know, I mean, that's just a basic, like, human simple thing, right? The reason why they're all different perspectives and all different parties is because we have different approaches and different ideas.
But see, you seem to play down. So last thing that I will say, right? And you know, we can move on. But you talk about these differences as practical things. Earlier, when you talked about the splits in the WWP, you talked about the splits in the SWP as like very practical things. You ended amicably. You decided that you wanted a different approach, and yet your emphasis on consciousness and leadership, like these sorts of articulations, seem to me to say at least that, like, these splits inform what kind of leadership you are providing for these movements, and so they don't seem to just be technical. And so I am pulled in two different directions in your presentation. I guess that, you know, the general sort of sense that on the one hand it's very difficult, there needs to be consciousness raising. You clearly, because you just articulated yourself from a previous party, think that that is not an adequate way of dealing with that problem. So you have a better way of dealing with that problem, but you seem to have articulated that better way as simply supporting what's already there.
Yeah, we can be separate from other organizations, but I mean, you know, we'll have debates with other organizations in our newspaper and our paper sometimes. I mean, our new book, which unfortunately I don't have, Socialists and War, talks about the ISO's approach to the anti-war movement, for example. And we've had back and forth with UFPJ, if you know what that is, and other. But our general approach is only to do that when it's necessary, and not to do it in a lecturing, sectarian, you know, sort of non-helpful way. I mean, you know, our approach to the split with the Workers' World Party is, hey, we're two small groups. We want to reach out to the masses. What good does it help if we, like, open up an attack on Workers' World Party? What good does that do the struggle? I mean, for us, the conclusion was it doesn't, and that's why we really, really wanted to stay. I mean, serious communists think very, very hard before they split with anyone. Splitting should never be the first option. Weakening, or we're very firm believers in organization. How else are we going to win unless we have organization? There's always a struggle, though. There's always a struggle between, like, which direction your organization should go in, you know, how you're organized internally, how your approach is externally, and what you end up doing. There's no utopia. There's no perfect purity in any of this stuff. It's all a struggle to build a party and to build some type of cohesive organization that can overthrow the system. But in that particular situation, we didn't feel like it was going to help anyone, including you guys here. I mean, you know, to attack an organization that we work with, but we felt like we couldn't stay in the organization. And I gave a practical example because for us, politics is about what you know, it's about, Marxism is about what you do. Marxists are what, you know, Marxists are, you know, judged on what they do. I mean, that's political activity.
Okay, James?
Yeah, I kind of want to, maybe I'll push back on the Libya stuff a little bit. I mean, I agree with you that that's certainly coming out with this, or whatever, stop the bombing line, you know, troops out, whatever happened, whether there are troops involved. Still seems to be a matter of national security, actually, but there you go. I think that is a litmus test to a point, and it should be phrased that way because in that sense, I'm Britain, but yeah, we were, if anything, more heavily involved in Libya than the States, and it's clearly a question of like, do you consent to the sort of exploitative operations of your own state or not? I kind of agree with that. I think that once you get to this, the other side of it, that, you know, well, digging, as you say, digging into things more deeply, writing sort of more theoretical, historical articles, it seems to me that then the line of like, well, we can't be seen to be joining in with imperialist criticism of Gaddafi or whatever, in the sense that it's, I'm sure a lot of it is racist, but I think that it then becomes an opposite. I don't see how you can, I mean, I haven't read your material on this, so I don't know if this is fair, but it seems to me that you can't address the actual situation on the ground in Libya during the course of that conflict, the way that the forces arose, without without addressing, for example, the fact that for the 7 years previous to the sudden switcheroo, Libya had been effectively a client state of the West, without pointing to the way that his regime treated sort of left-wing opposition to it, and so on, which at that point you're necessarily being critical because they're coming out in a paper with a Party for Socialism and Liberation on the front of it, and it doesn't seem very socialist or liberatory to be a Western client state. So it's the same with Saddam Hussein. I don't see how it's joining in with in that sense, the inevitable racist campaign against Arabs and sort of mad Muslim terrorist bombers to point out that well, Saddam Hussein slaughtered, massacred the Iraqi Communist Party, and the Americans didn't complain there. So these are serious propaganda points. So it seems to me that being too kind of, I'm not sure what the word is, but sort of resistant to kind of seeming to be singing from the same hymn sheet is necessarily the best way, because as you say, these are international conflicts. You start from the international situation, but the international situation will look very different to people who are communist suppressed in a regime like Gaddafi's or even Assad's, where they haven't had a very good time with it.
Yeah, I mean, the imperialist slogan was "Down with Gaddafi." And that was their basic slogan to mobilizing people for the U.S. participation in the bombing campaign, for the U.S. support to the anti-government fighters. We're not sure what's gained from putting the same slogan as a headline on our newspaper. Like "Down with Gaddafi" or "Down with Assad," which is, some groups do put those headlines on their newspapers. Some groups do have that as their program. We don't characterize Gaddafi as a client state. Actually, it's pretty clear that the U.S. Never really trusted the Gaddafi regime. All the rhetoric coming out of the Pentagon and Washington in the run-up to the war and a few years before that was that there was a danger of a resource nationalism, a resurgence of resource nationalism coming out of Libya. It is true that the Gaddafi government was making overtures to the U.S. and Britain and the imperialist powers. In other words, in a certain set of world relations where the U.S. is greatly powerful and bombing entire countries out of existence and overthrowing their governments and taking over the country, not just Libya, but many other governments have sought to negotiate with the United States in a way to try to get the U.S. not to do the same to them. For us, the biggest lesson is that if you're not a straight-up servant of Washington, then you are a subject of regime change and subject to be targeted, personally assassinated, and for the entire country to be annihilated. If you look at the example of North Korea, I think North Korea is taking this lesson to heart right now. The United States and South Korea are engaged in extremely aggressive military exercises that are simulating the nuclear destruction of North Korea. And North Korea has been the subject of economic sanctions, embargoes, and military threats. And the goal of the United States government is to overthrow the North Korean government. In response, North Korea has looked around the rest of the world and said, you know what? Even making deals with the imperialists is not working right now. The fundamental relationship of imperialism to the Middle East and to the rest of the world is you either go down on your knees and become an absolute client state, or we will bomb you into submission, we will invade your country, and we will take your country over. That is the real battle lines in the world right now. That's not made up. For us, that's a concrete assessment. So any slogan that we put forward in that basic relationship, we want to put it forward as a means of struggling against imperialism. So we see no need to join the demonization campaign. And the problem with joining the demonization campaign too is that it doesn't allow you to actually talk about the character of the Libyan state, that it was a product of a nationalist revolution that kicked the US and British bases out of the country and set the country on a path of being independent of imperialism. And there was a period of decades where the Libyan government supported movements all around the world against imperialism. And there were gains based on that nationalization that the people of the country still benefited from. All those gains are all gone. Like, for example, getting a check in your mail from the oil revenue, which Libyan citizens did, that's not going to happen anymore. Going to school for free, that's not going to happen anymore. Most of the Libyans in the United States, or many of the Libyans in the United States that were part of the apparatus to support the bombing campaign, a lot of them were going to school for free, and it was being paid in the United States, and it was being paid for by the Libyan government. For us, that's just is not more important to talk about. What the real stakes are for the Libyan people in having their country destroyed. I mean, there was a big mass demonstration here, 15,000 or more people against NATO when NATO met in Chicago. The organizers agreed to be silent about Syria, didn't talk about Libya, and even didn't talk about Iran. They did so on the basis of that, of the same thing. We can't do that, right? Because we need to somehow speak truth about Gaddafi, or we can't be seen as, like, you know, supporters of Gaddafi or supporters of Ahmadinejad or anything like that. For us, it's not, there's no need to be seen as that at all. All you got to do is say, hands off Syria and Iran, paint that on your banners, hand out leaflets that say that. And at the same time, right, and that's the issue too. NATO and the US are meeting here, and their main targets are Syria and Iran and a few other countries. If you don't, you know, for us, it's just as simple as that. We might agree on many other things, but it's as simple as that. How are you going to be able to, how do you put yourself in a position where you're able to raise those banners? And for us, it's not that complicated. And I understand where people are coming from, but if, you know, saying down with Gaddafi or down with Assad allows you not to raise those banners of hands off Syria and Iran when there is a mass anti-war demonstration and NATO's meeting just down the street, you know, then that's for us, that's, you know, that's a problem. We're still going to march with you. We still want to march with you. But when I say independent, that's what I mean. That is a concrete example when the Answer Coalition were the only ones to raise hands off Iran and hands off Syria banners in a mass demonstration. We marched with everyone else. We were involved in that movement. We didn't antagonize the organizers. We just had different leaflets, a different website, and different banners. Banners that spoke to the immediate need of opposing NATO at that particular time. That's what I mean by the necessity of, I mean, look, I don't have any desire to be independent of organizations or fight other well-meaning people or progressives. It's not about fighting people. It's that independent position is, for us, correlates to what's needed in order to liberate ourselves from capitalism.
So we have about 20 more minutes, and I have 4 people down at the moment to speak. So first, Nick, if you could ask a question.
You mentioned Greece as an example where a crisis has struck hard. In what way do you think that organizing strikes in USA against, for example, European Union or Germany's policy against Greece will contribute to radicalizing struggles in Greece? Since past year, anti-war movements didn't manage to stop imperialist intervention. Should left being in struggles effective today?
Yeah. So there's 2 questions, right? The one about Greece and the one about interventions not stopping the imperialist wars.
Yeah, and if left today should be effective in struggles.
I mean, there were millions of people in the streets against the Iraq War, and the war wasn't stopped. If we're being truthful, I mean, we were very doubtful that we were going to stop the Iraq War. We felt that it was necessary in order to try to stop it, right? In order to stop imperialist war right now, I mean, some serious struggle has to be going down. I mean, soldiers have to be unwilling to fight. There has to be a destabilization of the system. I mean, workers have to be struggling against the system here. I mean, the United States is the most powerful country in the history of the world. And they're not really challenged in any measurable way right now. The only thing that can challenge them are the billions of people who have it in their interest to challenge the system. And if those people aren't in motion in a particular way, it's very difficult to stop the imperialist war. Having said that, the fact that there was massive opposition to the war changed the way the imperialists are carrying out their interventions. They've decided that they can't launch full-scale ground invasions now. They have to do it through other means. Now, it's still the same goal. They're still working in the same goal, and they're still using some of the same devices. But like the full-scale ground invasion is not something that they've decided that they're going to reorient themselves towards not risking them. So mass struggle can make the imperialists, right? It can make them change. Now, mass struggle can also defeat it. Mass struggle can defeat an imperialist war. The war in Vietnam was defeated by the Vietnamese people, U.S. soldiers who are unwilling to fight, and an anti-war movement here in the United States. Like that was what, it was basically the Vietnamese people. So, I mean, most demonstrations that we undertake, many of them, especially in this period right now, are not necessarily going to achieve their goal. I mean, let's be honest. But if they don't happen, then we're certainly not going to change our goal. The worst thing that could happen in the world is that the imperialists gear up for war and there's no resistance in the United States. If there's no resistance in the United States. The other question was about Greece. There have been some small, like Occupy had a few actions in solidarity with Greece, and we participated in them. The situation in Greece, I mean, things are horrible for the people of Greece. I mean, things are horrible for workers and the people of Greece. I mean, it's like the economic conditions and the attacks on workers and the austerity attacks. They've created a real, I mean, there is a real crisis in Greece where the mass amount, the majority of the population is willing to go out on the streets and struggle to stop austerity. I mean, whole political parties have virtually gone out of existence in Greece. And in Greece, there are different leftist organizations. There's different ones besides that, but there's Syriza, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and there's also the Communist Party of Greece. And for us, the job of communists is to use a crisis in order to, if it's possible, and it's not, I don't think it's correct for someone from the United States to tell people in Greece what to do, right? I mean, they're there, they're on the ground. But if it's possible to use a crisis to overthrow the system, a crisis where people are clearly saying this type of economic model, this type of economic program is directly harming us and is making us suffer, and we want something else. For Syriza I'm not anti-Syriza, right? Let me just say that but the problem with Syriza is it's a broad coalition, and one of the organizing principles of that coalition is really to negotiate, to stop the austerity, which obviously I agree with, and to negotiate a better deal within the EU. The problem is as long as Greece stays in the EU, Greece will feel the effects of any economic crisis like they just have within the European Union, because capitalism is not a system of equality, and that includes between countries. The more powerful countries within the EU are going to use the EU to exploit the less powerful economies. That's why Greece and a few other countries are feeling the extent of that. So the Communist Party is advocating getting out of the EU, and also also having a new type of economy, a new type of government. But the one thing about the Greek Communist Party is that they've also adopted the old sort of they're anti-Syriza. Like part of their program is also, right, denouncing Syriza as part of the problem. The problem with that is for the Greek Communist Party, is that the vast majority of people are against austerity, but not necessarily want to leave the EU, because the United States, Britain, and Germany, and the Greek elite have all battered people with what will happen to you. You know what will happen to you if you leave the EU? You think it's bad now? Just wait. We will completely cut you off. Life as you know it will basically cease to exist, right? So the Greek Communist Party has to find a way, or some other formation, of maintaining that principled strategy, which is the way out for Greece and the way out for Greek workers, is leaving the EU, disbanding abolishing the EU, while still finding a way of being with Syriza in the anti-austerity movement, basically saying to Greek people, we're with you in the anti-austerity struggle, but we also think we need to leave the EU. Are you following what I'm saying? So neither one of those groups, because of those things, it's just, as of right now, hopefully this will change, have been able to, and maybe it's not possible in the, maybe it's definitely not possible in the basic circumstances that are happening. But it is a profound crisis, and it leads one to think, is there a possibility? Is there a possibility to overthrow the system? And whatever workers can do here to support, Greek workers, we should do.
Okay, so I'll take two final questions. Gabe coming back, and then Richard.
Okay. Yeah. So there was during the Q&A, you said you were talking how I think you said there's probably never going to be a communist elected mayor in the U.S. ever.
Well, I shouldn't say that, but yeah.
Right. And so.
I was trying to be humorous.
Right, but also reflecting, right? So what does it mean to have a revolutionary party in the U.S. if you think that? What does it mean? You also said there's a way in which it doesn't make sense to have a program today, and so, but you have one because you want to put forward your analysis, and so what is it? How are you going to make your program realizable? If you think that on the one hand it doesn't make sense to have a program and also revolution in the U.S. is impossible.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to have a program. Obviously, we have one, but like what I was saying, for me, the program is an actual political guide for workers, right? And in the specific circumstances we find ourselves in, that's not necessarily going, like the masses of workers right now are not going to take on the program of the Party for Socialism and Liberation as their program. So the reason why I pointed that out, I'm saying this is a program in advance. We're putting this program now because we feel that the conditions are such that the rebirth of struggle, and based on different signs that I talked about, the Occupy movement and others, are totally possible. And that we want people to have something as not as an academic exercise, but as a practical example of what it would mean for people to have power, to take on the existing structure and have power, like a program for. In other words, a program. We see the program as a program for mass struggle. Yeah. What was the other part? What was your first question?
Well, right. It's a program for mass struggle, but
yeah.
And there's a way in which struggle is happening, but also there's a way in which revolution is never going to happen. So what kind of program is it?
Oh, is revolution? Did I say revolution is never going to happen?
Well, you said, I was extrapolating. You said a communist would never be elected mayor.
Well, yeah, but election's different than a revolution. I absolutely. There absolutely can be and should be and ought to be, and some, dare I say, will be a communist revolution in the United States. There's no other way, with the type of societies we have and the economic forces in play, there's no other way for people to fulfill their needs and potentials under this system. It's not possible. People are always going to be butting their heads up against it. You know, it's been a long time since there's been a mass working class struggle and there's been mass communist or socialist parties in the United States. I mean, let's be honest about that. But all that means to us is that they're needed. You know, unless we have those type of organizations, we're going to keep getting beaten over the head. I mean, just outrageous things like them closing 54 schools in Chicago. I mean, like, how can they get away with just closing poor people's schools? I mean, it's just outrageously what it is because there's no social counterweight. There's no organizations. There's no social and those have to be developed. Those can't like me sitting here in this chair or being a member of the Party for Socialism or whatever organization. I can't like magically wish that to happen.
Right.
The system is oppressive. It's closing people's schools. In that situation, you enter into the struggle and hope to aid the struggle and build people's consciousness. That's how people learn. Like, for example, people in the Occupy movement at the beginning were like thinking the cops were part of the movement.
Wait, so can I just...
But many of them learned through the course of that struggle. In fact, most of the people in the Occupy learned that the cops are not part of that struggle. But there's no way you can learn that by like a communist like myself can't just go knocking on people's doors or speaking to groups of people and make that happen. We don't control the playing field. We don't control the playing field, but the playing field is inherently oppressive and attacks people if no one's struggling against it. So, but we're still in that process. The system, the ruling class is waging war on people, and they're using the economic crisis to escalate the war. The people will fight back. People don't sit down forever and just let stuff happen to them. But we don't have like a magic button to do that. All we're for is entering that struggle and hoping to elevate that struggle to a general struggle against the system. And that's difficult. That's not an easy task. But I personally, I don't see any other alternative historically. I don't see any, I mean, what else is the trajectory? Just having them keep impoverishing us? I mean, I'm a community college teacher. I have it better than a lot of workers because, you know, I'm in the classroom less than other people. I mean, you know, teachers actually have to work really hard at this point. But, you know, every contract, they keep telling us we got to make less money. More of us have to be part-time and part-time. You know, you have to work 80 hours a week as a community college teacher, an adjunct, literally to make like $25,000 a year, and you get no benefits, you know? I mean, and 30 years ago, it wasn't like that. 30 years ago, 80% of adjuncts had a full-time job with full benefits. And we worked and only had to teach 3 classes a semester or 4 classes a semester. There's only so long that people are going to take that without fighting back. But we can't, like, you know, we have the control we do. For us, that's why we have an organization, because an organization gives us more control over that situation than anything else.
Yeah, I guess I have a few comments. One is, like, you talked about the ruling class, the mass protest affecting how the ruling class conducted the war, and I'm old enough to remember when people were talking about the Vietnam syndrome, and as far as I can tell, the Vietnam syndrome over the last decade has been pretty effectively kicked. Nobody worries about the Vietnam syndrome. People have gotten used to more or less permanent, low-level warfare somewhere in the world, and exactly how it's conducted. That doesn't. And I mean, in the case of, you mentioned North Korea, which I thought was an interesting example. Now, I would agree certainly that, although I consider North Korea a horrible dictatorship, that I certainly don't hold up as a model, that North Korea is not a capitalist society. I think that societies like Libya and Syria are entirely capitalist societies. And what is interesting right now is that basically the opposition to those Arab nationalist regimes, never been in Libya, but I have been in Syria before the Civil War, is coming from an Islamist right. And your organization, if I remember my history, eventually comes from a split with the Workers' World Party and goes back to Sam Marcy's global class war thesis, which I understand made a certain sense at a certain point when you had the Soviet Union. But I find it like hard when you're talking about the world, not maybe North Korea, but when you're talking about places like Syria, I don't see, I mean, yes, okay, the imperialists may or may not intervene. I mean, there was a lot of criticism of Obama from Republicans about why bother, you know, in terms of Libya. I mean, there was a split in the Republican Party. So McCain was very interventionist. Other people were against it, including Sarah Palin. I mean, those are tactical questions, but I don't see how you can hold up these sort of nationalist regimes as in any way challenging global capitalism. Not even in some, in the ways you might hold up certainly the Vietnamese or North Korea as some kind of challenge. Like what you think of that challenge or what you think of the character of that regime is a separate issue. But just I don't see any, and you mentioned Greece. I mean, so if Greece leaves the EU, well, yeah, of course the Greek economy will be a mess. It won't even have to be something done to it by some deliberate policy. It'll just be a massive capital flow.
Well, if Greek were,
I mean, how
right,
does that even
Greek,
represent a
yeah.
progressive? I mean, a progressive goal would presumably be something that, at the minimum, would call for the abolition of overthrow of capitalism in Greece. But really, as a program, aren't you talking about realistically something that would aim for the abolition of capitalism in Europe? I mean, there was a slogan that used to be raised as the Socialist United States of Europe. I mean, if you can't even put forward that as an idea, I think you're endlessly stuck in a series of alternate dead ends.
I mean, it's up to the Greece people to decide whether they want to stay in the EU. I mean, that's not up for me to
I'm
decide.
not saying.
But the thing is like, how else? I mean, if Greece were to leave the EU, I mean, they would pretty much, have to reorganize their economy on some other basis. You can advocate for leaving the EU and for socialism, for putting the means of production in the hands of publicly owned and for working people. I mean, I'm not sure, like, like, for example, what other course there is for people of Greece. I mean, the question about, whether you're staying in the EU or leaving the EU is, like, for me, it's just like pivotal importance. I mean, how can you stay in the EU if you're Greece and negotiate your way out of a capitalist system which will relegate you to, as a smaller economy, as to the poorer economy? That's exactly what's happened. I mean, the question about, like, Libya or Syria. I mean, Libya and Syria are capitalist countries. I mean, we're not upholding the Libyan regime or the Syrian regime as examples of anything. I mean, we should talk, honestly about, what type of societies they have. But I mean, I think the really important thing is are you for U.S., British, and French intervention, or are you against it? And on what basis are you against it? We were against the intervention of Libya and in Syria on the basis that these are countries that the U.S. is trying to destroy and bring to their knees and establish as puppets, clients, servants. We're against that. Those are the U.S. and British and French aims. And their devices for doing that are trying to demonize the leaders of those countries using racist terminology in order to get working people to go along with that. We're not for those racist demonization campaigns either. Plus, those are lies. I mean, they're grave mischaracterizations of the history of the people and of those countries and of the persons. So we see no reason to join in that campaign. We don't think that North Korea is like a horrible dictatorship, and honestly think that is very correlative to, like, a racist campaign that the U.S. undertakes to isolate and demonize the Korean people. I mean, we don't have time, or I'd say what we think of exactly of Korea. I mean, if you want to stay around, I mean, I actually have to leave because I have to take over care for my young child because my wife is a nurse and she has to go to work, but I can stay for a tiny little bit if people want to. I'm sure people may not want to hear anything else I have to say too. I wouldn't blame you.
No, that's great. Thank you, John. And
Thank you.
yeah,